Hello and welcome to today's discussion, Malaysia, China and the region in a pivotal year. My name is Susannah Patton and I'm the Director of the Southeast Asia Program here at the Lowy Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and extend my respect to elders past and present. I'm really thrilled to be hosting today's discussion, bringing perspectives from the ANU Malaysia update, which will take place in Canberra on Friday. This year, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN, which gives it a special prominence in regional diplomacy, something we've seen in recent days with PM Anwar convening leaders from Thailand and Cambodia to discuss a ceasefire deal. But more broadly, I think Malaysia is at a really interesting inflection point in its foreign policy and engagement with the world, given that we're in an increasingly challenging period with many countries having to navigate between the US and China. Let me briefly introduce our speakers for today's session and then we'll get stuck into our discussion. To my far right, Dr. Ross Tapsell is the Director of the ANU Malaysia Institute and Associate Professor at the Australian National University's College of Asia and the Pacific. Ross is the convener of this year's Malaysia Update Conference. Dr. Syaza Shukri is Associate Professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia and a Visiting Fellow at the Iseas Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And Dr. Ngeow Chow-Bing is Associate Professor and Director of the Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya and a non-resident scholar at Carnegie, China. So we're really thrilled to have you all with us here today. So Ross, let me start by asking you to frame up the conversation. You're convening this year's Malaysia Update. You've brought together a great lineup of speakers from Australia and Malaysia. What do you think are the key drivers that we need to understand here in Australia about what's happening in Malaysia at this point in terms of its regional role and engagement with the world?
Yeah, thank you, Susannah, and thanks everyone for coming. Great to see such a large full room to talk about Malaysia. Malaysia is often like a bellwether country for how we see the region. I guess if it was a US state in an election, it'd be like Wisconsin or something, like a bellwether state or a swing. So we think of Malaysia as very important for geopolitical and state of democracy in the region. Malaysia is often considered to be hedging between the US and China. That's a term in IR that's often used. But the debates now will be, is it hedging more towards China? Chow-Bing, I guess, will talk about this. Economically, it's a middle-income country. Its economy is doing reasonably well, but there is, similar to Australia, cost of living pressures, concerns around growing inequality. Malaysia is very important to Australia. It's our second largest trading partner in ASEAN. We're both in the top 10 of each other's. I think it's 8th for Australia is 8th for Malaysia and 10th for Australia. So. There is good trade and investment going on. The issue that we're thinking about for this conference is businesses and governments, they're relying on a predictable regulatory environment. And Malaysia's political environment over the last, 8 years or so has not been predictable. In some ways, there's a lot of good things to come for that, a more democratic Malaysia, a more open contest during election times. Freer and fairer elections since 2022, but the question is, is this predictable, regular environment going to remain predictable at a time of great political uncertainty? So Malaysians often joke that, we're Singapore but at a discount, and that's no longer the case. We can't really see Malaysia, I think, as the predictable model that you might see Singapore. For Australia, Malaysia exemplifies a lot about our Southeast Asia strategy. Migration is hugely important to the Australia-Malaysia relationship. There's about 180,000 Australians who were born in Malaysia, perhaps some of you in this room. And we have some very prominent Malaysian Australians, including, of course, in foreign policy, with Penny Wong being the foreign minister. So we often take it for granted. We take it for granted, and we're often sometimes unimaginative with Malaysia because of these people-to-people and migration links. For example, when we changed the rules to make it harder for Malaysians to get a visa to Australia, because Malaysia was the #1 visa overstayer in Malaysia at a period of time, suddenly that can really upend how Malaysians think about Australia, that they're getting rejected for visas in ways that they didn't expect to get rejected, for not ticking the right box and not having the right form, and then suddenly you're rejected for a visa to Australia. In universities, of course, and education, a hugely important part of the Malaysia-Australia relationship. Lots of Malaysians studying in Australia. I would say that one of our problems is that we are dropping the numbers broadly of Malaysians studying in Australia, but also the elites and the high-level Malaysians that we have that have gone on into positions of business or government, or positions of power in various industries, are no longer coming to Australia in the way that they used to in the 60s, 70s, or even in the early 1990s. And so just from my own experience at the ANU, where we do have alumni who are in government and business and high court judges and so on, that generation isn't coming through again to Australia, in large part because I think we're not emphasising enough, we're not advertising enough that Australian universities should be places for the best of Malaysians, but also because we're losing a lot of expertise, and a number of people that I would have ordinarily invited to the conference in Canberra have lost their jobs over the last 12 to 24 months. So our expertise on Southeast Asia and Malaysia is declining. And even in my own institution that I am working at now, ANU, we're having a lot of job cuts at the moment. So this is a broader concern about the education sector, which I think is very important for Australia-Malaysia relationship. Very finally, diplomatic links, of course, very strong. You ask any ambassador or high commissioner in Southeast Asia, how's our relationship? They'll say it's wonderful, terrific. Beauty bonds have never been better. But regionally, we're losing influence, I think. And so I'll leave you with that comment to see what the rest think.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ross. I think really appreciate the way that you frame that, and particularly your remarks about education. I think it's so important, and it's something that I've written about a little bit as well. And I think the fact that Malaysia is an upper middle income country, and so a lot of Malaysian students aren't eligible for the same scholarships as students from other Southeast Asian countries, is something that we really need to address to remain kind of competitive in that area. So let me turn to you, Chow-Bing. So your research focuses on Malaysian foreign policy, especially relations with China. Can you give us your sense of PM Anwar as a foreign policy maker in general, and then specifically your views on the Malaysia-China relationship? To what extent is that changing under Anwar, or is this more a case of continuity with the past?
Thanks, Susannah. Thanks, Ross, for inviting me to be here, and very glad to have this platform to share my views and observations. First of all, I think about Prime Minister Anwar as a foreign policy maker as a general picture. This is a cabinet basically pretty much very deferential to Anwar, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim as a foreign policy maker, because with all due respect to the foreign ministers and other ministers that hold portfolios that are related to some of the international issues, Anwar is basically has an outsized personality and presence when it comes to international issues. He basically dominates. He's basically well known internationally, regionally. I mean, compared to some of his predecessors, the past two predecessors, people probably have no idea who are they unless you are familiar with Malaysia. But Anwar's name, reputation, basically he puts Malaysia on the map in a way. So, and that gives him also a lot of confidence, and that he is the primary foreign policy maker in Malaysia. That's in one way, it's a continuity in terms of Malaysia having a very PM-centric foreign policy process. Sometimes it depends on different prime minister also, but in a way he has his own, of course, his own dynamic, how he views the world. how he understands and interprets and judges and reads, sometimes, and perhaps most of the time, can actually have an impact on the foreign policy of Malaysia. One good example would be BRICS, the decision to join the BRICS. I think he was pretty much Anwar's own personal reading, judgment, in terms of joining this platform or organization. And then the whole cabinet and the whole foreign ministry came to endorse afterwards, not before that. So there's perhaps one example how Anwar basically today dominates foreign policy thinking in Malaysia. The other side of it, of course, is that sometimes that he may have I would say sometimes he may have too much of influence in a way, in a sense that there is not enough second opinion from within the cabinet to sometimes say to Prime Minister, no, whether this is a good idea or not, no, whether we should think through it again, and so on and so forth. But I do think that in time, of course, his foreign policy generally will get the consensual support from his cabinet ministers as well. When it comes to China, Malaysia-China relation is generally stable and consistent over the years. The only time that when there was a period of uncertainty was back in 2018 when we have a change of government that made Malaysia more open and dynamic. And then the foreign policy side of it was that there was a period of, I wouldn't say it's a drastic change. Malaysia never experienced like some other countries have, with a different administration, you have a wide swing in foreign policy. It was never really the case, but there was a period that was a bit of an uncertainty or hesitancy, I would say. But overall, the pattern is still quite generally, I would say, positive and consistent. And in that sense, Anwar is much more a continuity in terms of relationship with China. But again, the differences will be he is very much determined, I would say, in enhancing and upgrading the relationship to the extent of that there are a lot of interpretations out there that Malaysia is now shifting more towards China in terms of a very binary, whether US or China kind of a view. I would say on the optics side, that may be true to a certain extent, but I think that Anwar, Prime Minister Anwar's and Malaysia overall foreign policy hasn't really changed from the non-aligned position. We are still friends to all, wants to cultivate relationship to all important partners and countries in the world. Yes, China is a very important country where Prime Minister Anwar has spent a lot of time trying to cultivate, but look at his engagement with other countries. The USI is a bit complicated, it's true, but I think if you look at his relationship with other countries, Japan, European powers, Australia, India, you don't sense that he is overwhelmingly putting all the baskets, all the eggs on the China basket. I think we have a more balanced view about Anwar's foreign policy in this sense. All right, I will stop here maybe.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll come back more and discuss more. In particular, you mentioned the US is a bit complicated for a few different reasons. So we'll come back and expound on that during the discussion. So let me turn now to you, Syaza. I'd be interested if we could go a bit more into the domestic drivers of Malaysia's foreign policy. The main opposition to PM Anwar is PAS, a conservative Islamist party. How do you see Islamist pressure more broadly shaping Anwar's foreign policy, especially on the Middle East, but perhaps with implications that extend beyond the Middle East as well?
Thank you, Susannah. And thank you to the Lowy Institute for having us. Good morning. So I want to build on what Chow-Bing mentioned, that I also feel that the foreign policy in Malaysia is really an Anwar's foreign policy, right? It's not really like his administration and government. And I relate that to domestic politics because, as Susannah mentioned, that Anwar's coalition is stable right now. But when it was formed to what we call the unity government, it was seen as fragile. We don't know yet how it would pan out. We don't know what's the relationship with his partner, Barisan Nasional. But now it looks quite stable. So for Anwar, the main pressure points are coming from the opposition. The coalition is called Perikatan Nasional, but the main party within it is the Islamist PAS. So for Perikatan Nasional, their main support comes from the Malay Muslims. And that is the struggle for Anwar to get the support from this base. And we can see that the best example we can talk about it is we had a protest that happened over the weekend on the 26th, which was organized by the opposition. Well, the protest was mostly on economic issues, like Ross mentioned, cost of living issues, prices of healthcare, of housing are going up, wages are stagnant. So these are the main issues that were voiced out during the protest. But we cannot run away from the fact that it was organized by the opposition. And if we look at the participants of that protest itself, most are from the Malay Muslim community. So this is who Anwar is trying to win over, which we can discuss. Will it work or not? My suspicion is it's going to be a very difficult task for him. But the point is that in trying to win over the Malay Muslims, he had to speak more on Malay Muslim issues on the global stage. The best example is, of course, on the Palestinian issue. Of course, we can argue that this is like Anwar's long-standing view. If you follow him, even from his youth activism days, he's always spoken up on the Palestinian issue. So this appears like a continuation of that. Sure, but I also made the argument that it is a kind of political calibration as well. It's kind of a domestic signaling that I am still a champion of these causes. So the opposition cannot claim that, Anwar is this quote-unquote liberal, which is used in Malaysia as a derogatory term, or pejorative anyway, that, Anwar is a liberal. So he can say that, if I'm a liberal, why would I care about the Palestinian issue? And he's very vocal on what's going on in Gaza. We know that since 2023, I think he held a rally in October, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, at the end of October, he held a huge rally. I think Anwar is among the most vocal among Muslim leaders right now. And it has its issues, of course, because like I mentioned earlier, the concerns of the public is on the economic issues. So that is why if you look at his foreign policy, he's been going around trying to get investments from all across the world, but he's trying to balance that with his outspokenness on Gaza. And it's not just Gaza, right? When the Iranian attacks on Iran happened, he was vocal about that as well. So again, my argument is that this is all a posturing from him for him to claim legitimacy as a Muslim leader in Malaysia and also globally. The challenge is, as Chow-Bing mentioned, about Malaysia-US relations. This has affected us. There's no high level, Anwar has not had calls or visits or the likes with President Trump, so people are questioning all of this. And I believe it was just last week, if I'm not mistaken, in Parliament, Anwar stated again firmly in Parliament that Malaysia will not bow down to American pressure when it comes to Gaza. So how will Anwar balance these two? So this is the thing that we're looking at. And if we talk about Malaysia-American relations, I have to mention about the possible nomination of US Ambassador to Malaysia, Nick Adams. Yeah, I have a few chuckles here. I don't know what the chuckle means, but yeah, it's a problem because of the comments that Nick Adams have made online and his support for Israel, and that had led to a protest again, I think 2 weeks back, a small-scale protest led by some youth activists in front of the American embassy in KL. So there is this pressure from the public that you call yourself to be this defender of Palestinian cause, of Gaza. So how are we going to deal with Nick Adams being a possible American ambassador to the United States? Of course, the government line right now is it's not yet certain, so let's not talk about it yet. So my point is, this is the challenges for Anwar. How can he balance being this Muslim leader and also trying to help Malaysia's economy, basically?
Yes, and this controversial figure, Nick Adams, is also kind of unfortunately an Australian person who went to America and then, for those of you who haven't followed this news, became part of the MAGA movement, has very controversial views about a range of issues, including Israel and the Palestinian cause, and has now been nominated as US ambassador to Malaysia. So kind of a very curious story. I'm keen to go a bit deeper on the US question, but perhaps first just be interested, Ross, in your view on the domestic political outlook, because what Syaza mentioned was very interesting, that, you know, PM Anwar is in a pretty strong position to the extent that he does face opposition. It's from PAS. How do you see the outlook like for us here in Australia? Should we be thinking about PM Anwar as someone who's going to have a degree of longevity in Malaysian politics? Is that something that we should be factoring into our thinking?
Well, certainly he would say that he's going to be here for the long term. He's absolutely intent on a second term. I was in KL not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of the politicking around local elections coming up in Sabah region is around, can you swear allegiance to Anwar in his second term as the Prime Minister candidate for the next election in 2026? Most likely. So 27, yeah, 27
is the term end.
Yeah. So there is no indication that Anwar is thinking, well, you know, I've had my time, I'm now going to appoint another successor. Most recently, there's been internal domestic issues within his party, and he's ousted a potential future Prime Minister, Rafizi Ramli, and had his fingers all over some of the appointments in terms of his local party positions, and his daughter, Nurul Izzah, is now heading the party, or the party chairwoman. So what we're seeing here is, again, this sort of, Anwar's got a history of this, of making sure that there is no clear successor to him, and sometimes playing off the younger generation against each other, which often leads to enormous fallings out later, and then they join other parties and so on. So yes, a lot of what he wants to do is to keep Malaysia stable, keep the economy, you know, growing, and staying in with UMNO, the political party that ruled Malaysia for roughly 60 years. And that's going to be the challenge. Can he keep, he's juggling a lot at the moment, can he keep all of these other parties, plus the Malaysian royalty, plus his own party, plus people who are saying he's not being liberal enough? You know, Bersih, the organisation for free, clean and fair governance, gave him an F, I think, 2 years ago, which was then upgraded. I think he's now got a D this year. But in other words, the reformists are very unhappy with Anwar, as are the Islamists, as is described by the protests. So he's juggling all of this. But absolutely the strategy is, I want to remain Prime Minister and I want to run again. The bigger problem is, where's the institutional reforms? Should Malaysia have a limited term for prime ministers? You know, should there be term limits on prime ministers? And it doesn't look like he's moving in any direction for any of these broader reforms that should be happening, I think, if you're hoping for a more democratic Malaysia.
So potentially a picture of short-term political stability, but in the long term, a lot of big questions, kind of going back to the point you made in your opening remarks, Ross, about no longer being a kind of Singapore level of stability. Yeah, it's very interesting. On the US, maybe Chow-Bing, back to you. We've talked a bit about the way that Middle East issues play into the US-Malaysia relationship. Obviously, the lack of high-level contact. I think there's not been a phone call even between the Prime Minister and President Trump here in Australia. There's a lot of concern about our lack of high-level contact as well, but we have had a phone call or two, I think. How is the tariff question playing in? Because Malaysia, of course, is a big exporting country. And we're still waiting to find out the outcome on the tariff question. But how's that being looked at in Malaysia?
Yeah. Well, traditionally, interactions with the US leaders, generally speaking, is, well, if you look back to history, there haven't really been a lot of American presidential visits to the country. Obama came when he was in power. And before Obama, you have to trace all the way back to, let me think, maybe Lyndon Johnson. Yeah, if my memory serves me right. So there is no way, that is not the main avenue for the US to exercise its diplomacy. So we have to put that in context. Of course, China is closer geographically, and again, we put it to US-China lens, then China enjoy a lot of advantages. Prime Minister Anwar already met Li Qiang, Premier of China, I think at least four times, and Xi Jinping at least twice. Xi Jinping also visited Malaysia this year, so the personal rapport is quite good. You won't see that between Prime Minister Anwar and President Trump, even if they have met. I think they won't really develop personal chemistry or rapport. So at one level, personal level, top level interaction has not really been the focus of US diplomacy in a way. They have always focused more on a very tangible, functional areas of cooperation. And that is something sometimes Malaysia can appreciate too, because again, coming back to the complications from Middle East conflicts over there, sometimes not necessarily a good idea to be pictured together with President Trump. So rather, you just want to have very tangible, functional cooperation. And at that level, I would say Malaysia-US relationship is still quite well established, quite strong, especially those who are working on the defense and security sector. US and Australia are the two long-standing security and defense partners of Malaysia. These are the two strongest, most well-developed and robust defense and security programs, including exercises, training, officer education, and so on and so forth. So I think at that front, US-Malaysia relationship is still going quite well, I would say well, but generally stable. Stable. But of course, we don't know whether Trump may think that all this exercise with Malaysia military is a waste of money, and then he may decide something else. So far, it hasn't really happened yet, but maybe in the future. And then it will also, if that happens, it will cut into some of the very positive and functional collaboration between Malaysia and US currently. So that is one thing. Yes, the tariff, of course, is a huge problem for Malaysia exporters. For Malaysia's, it also challenged how Malaysia look at global trade order as supposed to be based on rules, based on multilateral system, based on the WTO and all these things that the US at the moment doesn't really care about anymore. We are hit with 24% when it was first announced, and we have sent our trade minister to the United States twice to negotiate. There is no outcome yet. Basically, right now, there are about 3 or 4 approaches trying to deal with this issue of US tariff. First, of course, we're still trying to negotiate at a bilateral level, just like many of other ASEAN countries have done, to try to secure a rate that will be basically more, less harmful to Malaysia's interests. And in the process, the US has basically put forth several demands. There is the context of Anwar's speech in Parliament that we won't compromise on some of the things of sovereignty and other issues. But basically, the US wants Malaysia to, of course, reduce deficits, increase investment in the US, reduce non-trade barriers, and finally, to be more compliant on US technological controls. That is basically coming to the issue of China. On all these 4 issues, we will have some difficulties fulfilling, I would say. Non-trade barriers, some of the things like the halal certification, maybe it can be improved a little bit, but some of the things it relates to some of the domestic legitimacy, some of the government's programs to assist the Bumiputra community. So may not be actually quite easy to fulfill all these demands. Actually, among the 4 demands, I think the one that Malaysia would most likely fulfill would be actually the technological restrictions, to be more compliant with the US technological restrictions. So that is one thing Malaysia will be doing. And of course, at the broader level, Malaysia has called for a more united views on these issues. First, at the regional level, ASEAN. It has emphasized a number of times that ASEAN has to be more cohesive in coming with a common position on tariffs. Although I think this is still more at the rhetorical and optic level rather than at the substance level. The third would be to diversify economic partnerships. Anwar can now explain that many of his international travels exactly is to prepare this day, right? Malaysia cannot just rely on the US and China, but we have to reach out to more and more partners, right? Including India, Japan,
Indonesia, yes.
Indonesia, which he just went to Brazil, Brazil, Australia, and so on and so forth. And that will give him good justifications, basically why Malaysia needs a more different partners to cushion some of these impacts. Finally, of course, have to come back to China. When President Xi visited visited Malaysia, Anwar basically spoke a lot about how Malaysia and China stood together in a sense of facing these US tariffs. He talked about weaponization of market access and so on and so forth. But the fact is China's products are also creating problems for Malaysia's manufacturers and exporters. We are being squeezed from both sides in a way. On the supply side is from the China side, and the demand side is the US. Basically, both sides are having troubles, but we are engaging China more frequently, I would say, also in terms of dealing with some of the issues and also trying to make them more open about their market to absorb some of the exports that used to go to the US. But of course, this is a long-term trend. It's not going to have any immediate impact. At the short term, some of our exporting manufacturer side will definitely suffer, I would say.
So this is the problem that many developing countries are facing, where they're seeing an import surge from China as China faces these export restrictions in the US and European markets. And in a sense, I think I'm right in saying that some of the demands that the US is making on non-tariff barriers could actually expose Malaysia to more imports from China potentially, and actually exacerbate this problem, which is hugely concerning to manufacturers and so on. So
yeah, I agree.
So it's a very kind of complex set of policies.
When the US asked to remove some of the non-trade barriers, basically they are thinking that the American exporters could export Malaysia, but I think you actually benefit the Chinese exporters more than the American exporters. Yeah.
So one of the responses to this situation, which you touched on, is the idea of diversification. And Chow-Bing, you mentioned the BRICS earlier on. I'm interested to ask you, Syaza, about the BRICS and this idea about sort of cooperation with a broader range of countries from the global south. How do you see that as a sort of strand within Malaysia's foreign policy? Do you think it's becoming more important, that idea? And to what extent is it sort of political versus being about the economic objective of diversifying exports?
Right. I think I don't have much to add to what Chow-Bing said. But basically, my feeling is that definitely Malaysia being a partner, right? A partner in BRICS is a form of pluralizing our foreign policy, to not be too dependent on either Malaysia or China. But I do feel that part of it is a political project, again, trying to show that Anwar, beyond just being, like I was saying earlier, the so-called global Muslim leader, but also a leader of the global South, that he is the face of those who are downtrodden. And again, this is something that you can trace back in Anwar's journey, I guess. He's always been this champion of the poor, being a bit of anti-hegemonic. But, when I think of what's going on right now, when we talk about Malaysia's relationship with all these other countries, I was thinking and I was comparing in my head about Mahathir. So Mahathir was our prime minister in the 80s and 90s. And of course, the thing that I was thinking of is Mahathir is just as outspoken, being so-called anti-Western and all of these things that were going on back then. So I was trying to think what's the difference between back then and Anwar now. What's the situation? And I feel that during Mahathir's time, the main thing is that he had a more stable government, definitely a stronger economy in the 90s. So whatever he says back then, kind of no one really questions it. But what's going on in Malaysia right now with Anwar and what we discussed earlier and all the problems that he's facing right now, everything that he says gets questioned. Of course, it's political, the opposition doesn't really have an alternative response to whatever is going on. But it's unfortunate that he needs to kind of raise the bar every time he speaks up about whatever it is, the global south and everything else. And another thing that I was thinking of, during Mahathir's time, it was a unipolar world. So whatever that Mahathir said, people kind of know that it's basically rhetoric, that Malaysia can't really escape our more or less dependence on America back then. But with what's going on with Anwar these days, that is where the problem comes up, when it's not just mere rhetoric anymore. Whatever he says and all the spaces that he's going, all of this engagement with all of these other countries, it brings concern to America specifically, to the West. Where is Malaysia heading? But I think Anwar is steadfast on that, just because that's what he's always championed, I guess.
So let's talk a little bit about ASEAN, because Malaysia is chairing ASEAN this year, and then I'll come to the audience for questions. So if you want to have a think about something that you might like to ask our panellists, please start to do so. I don't know, Ross, did you want to offer any thoughts on how you see sort of PM Anwar in that role as ASEAN chair? It's obviously been quite prominent in the last few days in particular. What strikes you about the way that Malaysia's approached this task?
Well, this could be a good debate, between the three of us, because we've been putting a lot of energy into ASEAN. Australian government has been putting a lot of energies and programs and second track diplomacy efforts in the hope that that Anwar and Malaysia will be using ASEAN in a way that is, I guess, more forceful, more active, more, I'm not sure if aggressive is the right word, but more...
robust.
Robust, yes. It'd be a good question, has that delivered? Not much on Myanmar. Yes, inclusion of East Timor, that's a great thing. That's been a positive, but we would like to see, I'm sure in Australia, would like to see more statements about South China Sea. Even in this recent Thai-Cambodia conflict, which Anwar is saying, well, look, this shows that ASEAN works, and of course he's claiming credit and deserves some credit for the meetings that were held. But even then, you could question whether Trump's intervention was actually the more assertive and more powerful thing that got the ceasefire. Don't want to give Trump too much credit there, but the point is Anwar was making statements about ASEAN stepping in quite a few weeks before. So I don't know, I'm skeptical, but I'd be interested in what others think about Malaysia and ASEAN so far. It's early days.
Yeah, it's already halfway through.
Halfway, yeah, true.
Halfway through. I don't think the big geopolitical issues will be solved this year or next year anyway. Actually, the Thai-Cambodia, in a way, is true. The Trump pressure probably play a very important role, but it's unexpected when Malaysia assumed the chairmanship that there will be this conflict, and then at least Malaysia or Anwar can claim that, well, we have done something in terms of solving, or put a temporary pause to one of the hot conflict issues within the region. But other ongoing more difficult issues, Myanmar and South China Sea, actually I don't think from the very beginning that there will be any breakthrough within this year or next year. The issues are basically, to a certain extent, beyond any ASEAN chair. It doesn't mean that as a chair you can make things move. It doesn't work that way. It depends a lot on the actual actors within the parties to this conflict, how their interests have come to the point that where they have to make compromises. The most is that you can keep emphasizing this, and then you can provide the agenda, you can provide the platform, you can increase the number of discussions and meetings just to try to see if they can come to that level. But I don't think it can be solvable this year or next year. But I do think that within this year, a number of things that have been achieved in terms of Malaysian chairmanship. First thing is the ASEAN Community 2045 is a very far away vision document, but it was not our Malaysia own credit, but of course it's prepared by a number of ASEAN countries before, but it was during this year that it has been more firmly announced. Some of the technical issues in terms of regional integration continue to see improvement. Though these are very boring stuff, but generally these are the stuff that actually make ASEAN, like travel, like doing business, like e-payments, easier and easier within the region, because you provide the platform for all these bureaucrats, ministers to come to discuss, and then we provide the to make sure that there will be something that improve. So digital economy, e-commerce, even the ASEAN power grid. Again, it's not something Malaysia started it, but all these are basically started a long time ago. But basically the role of the chair is to try to see whether there will be major improvement in this or that technical areas to do more.
They're the easy ones, right?
Sorry?
These are the easy ones.
Uncontroversial.
Uncontroversial one, easy ones, I would say. Some would say it's not necessarily easy one. Technically, it could be quite tough also. But if you want to say that, the tough geopolitical issues, I don't think, especially South China Sea, I would say, especially South China Sea, it's unlikely you will see any kind of breakthrough this year, next year, or the years ahead.
I think the Timor-Leste accession, which you mentioned, Ross, I think Malaysia does deserve some credit there. And it seems like that's one as well where leadership, where you have PM Anwar and President Prabowo working together to push it forward, is my own sort of assumption from the outside, is what maybe finally allowed that to shift. So that's interesting.
I have a tiny addition on the mediation that happened recently. I want to relate to domestic politics. So after that was announced, the opposition, one of the MPs from the opposition made fun of it, saying that, it doesn't matter if it's Anwar or any other prime minister, since we are the chair of ASEAN, it will go ahead. So Anwar should not take too much credit out of it. That's what they were saying. So this is part of my comment earlier when I said that whatever Anwar does, there will also be criticism. It is good. The opposition will have something to say about it, and one way or another, he has to respond. So that's unfortunate. But I do think that it's not true that any prime minister in Malaysia could have solved it. Like Chow-Bing said in his remark earlier, Anwar Ibrahim has his own pull factor that is able to bring people to the table, and maybe Trump has a big role of bringing them in the first place. But you can't deny that Anwar plays a major role in it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we'll take some questions. Please identify yourself and keep it short and sharp. So I see one hand in the middle towards the back there.
Broughton Robertson. I've got, I'm interested in the Malaysian domestic political angle, but it relates to Malaysia-China relations. And two aspects of it. One is China's treatment of its Muslim population, massive incarceration and destroying mosques. So China's clearly more anti-Muslim than the US, but why in domestic politics is the US is targeted, whereas China, as I understand it, it's much more limited. There's not protests outside the Chinese embassy, or etc. And similarly on the South China Sea, the Philippines and Vietnam. After the Philippines and Vietnam, it's really Malaysia's the number 3 in terms of China's activities, permanently stationing naval or at least Coast Guard, the same thing pretty much, ships off close to Malaysian claimed and much close to Malaysian China features in the South China Sea. So those two aspects, how is the domestic politics playing on them? Thanks.
Syaza, do you want to respond?
I'll take the first one, I guess. That's a very good point, and it's brought up here and there in Malaysia, but usually by small pockets of people who are interested in the cause. From my perspective, what I see is that when it comes to, there are a lot of issues for, we call Muslim minorities, right, from various governments across the world. But when it comes to China, I feel that the narrative right now is more on civilizational. So I think we discussed this before, that it's more of an East versus the West kind of situation. So that is why America is being pointed out a lot in this kind of situation as opposed to China, which we know there are things going on there as well. But as you mentioned, it's not really brought up because they are still seen as, part of the Eastern so-called civilization. So our quote-unquote, not enemy, I wouldn't use that term, but our focus would be on this is, Western society, Western civilization, whatever it is that they want to call it. So I feel that is the reason why China is not much talked about when we talk about the situation of the Muslims there. Another thing is the dynamic, I think, in Malaysia when it comes to China-Malaysia relationship is always, again, I'm thinking of the opposition if when they bring it up, is, China is coming over into Malaysia, challenging our sovereignty, influencing the ethnic Chinese in Malaysia. So that is the narrative that they push out, that within the country, we, the Malay Muslim population, we have to be careful of the ethnic Chinese who are Malaysians themselves, but they have ties, whatever, with China. So that is the major contention, I guess, domestically. But if we follow the opposition, we know they have close relations with China as well. They fly out to China all the time. So again, this is all political rhetoric, I guess, domestically.
On that issue, and maybe I just add a little bit, that we do have engagement with China on this issue, use more on a quiet private channel to engage them and have some mutual visits and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, that has kind of assure our government that we are able to talk to China on this issue, and we want to keep that way, so we don't want to be seen as too much projecting our own views and trying to apply pressures on China about this one. So I would just add on that one. On the South China Sea, Malaysia has always maintained a moderate or non-escalatory approach towards managing this issue. It won't be resolved, it can only be managed in the near term. And so far, this approach has served the interests of the country relatively well. How each country, claimant country, deems it is the best approach to protect their own interests is entirely up to different countries. But for Malaysia, so far, despite the dispute, we managed to continue to have a very robust relationship with China. It's not to say that their ships' intrusions are welcome, but they have so far not contributed any direct harm to the interests of the country. And we want to make sure that the diplomatic level of engaging China on this issue is always open, so we don't have to dial up all the time. We will dial up when there is certain necessity, when there are things that we deem that it has gone beyond what is acceptable, but we don't have to keep it that way. If things come back to normal, then we just have to dial down and continue the normal or what we consider moderate and non-escalatory approach.
Can I add one more thing? I just remember during this year of ASEAN chairmanship, there's a lot of activities, conferences going on actually on Islam and Confucianism in Malaysia going on right now. So again, that's why I'm trying to say that we're trying to find the similarity between Islam and Confucianism, because we're seeing as, we are a broader kind of Eastern civilization. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. One question there.
Hi there. My name's Cole Timon. I'm a master's student at the University of Sydney. I was hoping to get your insights on Malaysian federalism in the States, so turning a little bit more granular. It seemed like prior to BN being dislodged in 2018, there were some cracks showing as there were some elections of the opposition in some of the states like Penang and Selangor. I think there had been some talk after 2018 about some devolution of power back to the states, obviously a pretty strong federal government. I guess, do you see with some of the political opening that devolution might be in the cards, or do you think that the federal government and Anwar, with his cult of personality, might still try to retain a lot of that power at the federal level?
Want to take it out? Well, the short answer for me is the focus would be on Sabah and Sarawak. So that is the regionalism that when we talk about, they're asking for more autonomy and whatnot, especially for Sarawak, which is much more ahead than Sabah. But Sabah is trying to catch up. But I think that is where the discussion is right now. In the peninsula, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon when it comes to devolution of power of the federal power in Malaysia. Yeah, that would be my short answer. I know, Ross, if you have anything to add to that.
No, exactly. Everyone's talking about the coming Sabah elections, a lot of autonomy pushing in Sarawak, Sabah, wanting more of the state coffers. So all of the focus at the moment really is how much of the Anwar government is survived by or is, kept afloat by the support of Sabah and Sarawak. And so ultimately, yes, that's going to mean that there's going to be a lot of concessions made. But on the state federal level, yeah, there's some good researchers doing on this. I mean, you probably know some of this, Tricia Yeo and Seb Detman and these kind of people who have been writing about this for quite some time, that ultimately a more autonomous and democratic state governance leads to a more democratic federal government. And that is essentially seemingly what's been happening in Malaysia, and that's a wonderful thing. So you, at the state level, if you saw the opposition in power, then you can imagine it and you can see it and you can see the programs that come from it. And then at the national level, you vote for the opposition. And so that's what's happening democratically now in Malaysia. So there's an interesting political science nerd thesis here on that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad we got the chance to nerd out on that topic at the end here. I think we don't have time for any more questions, but please hang around at the end. Our panellists have time to chat with those of you who didn't get the chance to ask your questions. And what I thought I might do just to close out the discussion is just to do another quick round of our panel, starting with you, Ross, and I'll just ask you either for a sort of insider's style final observation or prediction, or perhaps something that you're watching when you're looking at Malaysia over the next year ahead, whether in terms of domestic politics or foreign policy. What's one thing that you think those of us who are here today should take away with us and look out for?
Yeah, thanks. So my own work is on disinformation largely. That's what I'm slowly writing a book on, disinformation in Southeast Asia. So to your question about why isn't the issue of the Uyghurs and Muslims in China more talked about in Malaysia, immediately my thought would be, well, what kind of disinformation programs are being run in Malaysia, including perhaps, Islam and Confucianism is that some, not necessarily is it disinformation, but some soft power initiative that is well played or well conducted by China. So for me, I think a lot of the things that I'm thinking about is, are we on the ball with that in Australia? Yes, we have good business ties. Yes, our diplomatic ties are excellent. We've talked about the stability in the Australia-Malaysia relationship. But in terms of issues like soft power, education, media, winning over hearts and minds in an influence operation argument, I think these are the broader trends that I see Malaysia as very important and frames a lot of what's happening in the region.
Thank you. Syaza?
Well, I think I want to go back to what Ross was asking, or when will be the next election? Because that would be what I'm looking at. Because yes, the term would end in 2027, but a lot of rumors are going around that it will be in 2026. But earlier this year, they were saying that it will be at the end of 2026. Recently, they're saying third quarter 2026. So that's why my feeling is sometime next year. But it depends on a lot of things, because while we say that the Anwar government now appears stable, it's not like, I don't know, it's not up to 70% of stability. And they're looking at the Sabah state election, I think, to decide on their next move. Because as was mentioned earlier, there were a lot of issues earlier this year with his party election, economically with the expansion of the sales services tax and a lot of other things. So Anwar needs to balance these two now that his approval rating is quite stable, but it's not free from criticism. So what would be the best spot, the nice spot for him to have that election? So I'm looking at that. We don't know, but most likely next year.
Thank you. Chow-Bing?
Maybe I just add a bit more about Malaysia's US ties in the sense that exactly our leaders, they are aware that there is not much, almost zero interaction at the top leader. Despite I say that this has not been a major factor, but we have extended an invitation for President Trump to come to the East Asia Summit towards the end of the year. There are no indications that he will come. And in the past, the US never really is interested in East Asia Summit or ASEAN-related things that much, right? They generally send their Vice President or Secretary of State. But anyway, an invitation has been extended. And if the likelihood is low, but if Trump does come, then there will be a high-level interaction. But on the other hand, I'm not sure whether that is a good thing. So if you say no, maybe it's just a blessing in disguise. We'll say that, well, we have done our part, right? But you decided not to come. Right? So the other thing I want to also emphasize is that actually we have tried to arrange a visit. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs have tried to arrange a visit to US. Anwar has visited US, but it's to attend UN General Assembly and to attend, there was another international. It's not about visit to US in that sense. But the reactions is very, very, they are not interested so far. So it's not that we don't really want, it's just that they are not very, very keen, or they are too busy dealing with other things and don't think Malaysia's Prime Minister visit is worth their time at the moment.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll leave our discussion there. For those of you who are interested in learning more, I think I'm right in saying that you can tune in to the conference on Friday online, so you don't have to travel to Canberra. It's cold enough here in Sydney as it is.
You are very welcome.
Please join me in thanking our panellists.